Hello, everybody. My name is Nicholas Orchard. I am a product designer, UI UX designer, industrial designer. I used to work at Axiom Space and determined that the 9 to 5 wasn't right for me. So now uh, I've pulled a lot of that knowledge from a lot of the psychological research that I did there, and now I combine that with a lot of the coaching knowledge that I've gotten from the Tony Robbins world and the Joseph McClendon world to coach people on figuring out what their passions are and how to live a happy life. And I also help startups and small teams uh, develop their products and services.
Nice.
And I'm Chris Dabao. I was a soccer coach for high school for 7 years, and that led to me actually being a now teacher coach, where I help teachers to be able to relate to their kids better and better engage them, so that in the classroom they're actually focused on learning and working on the same team together, as seems to be a struggle nowadays. I also am running a marketing company back home. So I do video and social media marketing. And I am a youth life coach and help people that are young adults, so like 14 to 22-year-olds, figure out what they want and how to get it.
Wow, we have a lot in common on that one, huh?
Yeah.
We're all coaches here.
Oh, yeah.
Focus on youth as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
This
that's
is great.
beautiful. I'm so excited to dive into both of your stories and how this all came about, because obviously the two of you are together, and you're on this podcast together as well. So it's going to be interesting to hear how both of you came together and how that all happened. But before we get into all of that, I do want to go right to the beginning of things, and I want to hear more about your stories, your upbringing, and what that was like for both of you. So whoever wants to go first. Why don't you just start and share your story?
Yeah.
We did meet you at the Global Youth Leadership Summit,
Hmm.
where we all had this, all of the guests that we've had on all have a passion for teenagers and the youth. And we were there to serve everyone. And I have to say that for Rayhan and I meeting you too is just so special. And we're just excited that you're here. So
Thank you. We're very excited too. We love meeting you guys. Yeah. My name is Nick, and I grew up in a town, well, partially Houston, Texas, and then another town in South Texas called Corpus Christi. And I have a huge family in both areas. Lots of them are fishermen or doctors or something of the sort. I really didn't have very many friends. I was always kind of the odd one out. I fit into lots of different groups, but avoided them because growing up in Houston, I mean, everyone thought I was going to be a football player in some kind of sport because I'm a big person. But all the kids that used to play sports when I was little were mean. So I wanted nothing to do with sports. I had a lot of acquaintances, but didn't feel super close to anybody. I just felt really close to a lot of my cousins. And when I was very little, most of my cousins were in Houston, and we moved away from Houston and moved into Corpus Christi with a lot of other cousins, although they were much older. So I lost that connection and felt a little lost for a few years, especially through my middle school and high school years, even into college, really. Kind of felt a little stunted figuring out who I was without very many outlets for me to there weren't really many opportunities for me to do hobbies that I enjoyed there. Um, Although still heavily leaned on my large family and amazing parents who were extremely active in my brother and I's lives. I have one little brother who's in dental school right now. And yeah, I mean, looking back, I feel like I had an extremely happy childhood. Um, Brother and I fought like brothers do normally, and I also feel like my parents were extremely strict. 8:30, 9 o'clock bedtime, not allowed to go to friends' houses unless they knew the parents very well. Good and bad to that we can get into for sure.
Awesome. Chris?
So I grew up in Chicagoland, just on the suburbs, just basically on the border of civilization and corn, because that's what Illinois is. There's like Chicago and then there's corn. So about an hour and a half out from the city. And I had the pleasure of growing up with two immigrant parents, but also being in a very predominantly white Caucasian area. Went to a high school that was like 95% white. And I was the token Asian friend in that friend group. And it was very much, when I was growing up, both my parents were nurses, and it's a very common Filipino thing to do. There's agencies in the Philippines that will just assign nurses to places. And that's how she figured out that she's going to be in Chicago. They had me about like 5 years or so after moving to the States. So it's still very much like developing their knowledge of the culture and understanding there. And so growing up, my dad, he'd be the one that was at home more. And my mom, she would work the night shift. So I'd go to school and then come home, and she wouldn't be home. And then if she ever was home, she was sleeping because she'd have to wake up to go to the night shift. So I mostly grew up just knowing my dad. And my dad was pretty standoffish as a parent, let me do I didn't have too much parenting growing up, and we'll get into what we think that that led to. And so I was the opposite, where I was very much out, like wanting to meet friends and seeking love and connection through peers, as opposed to getting it from family. I had a few family members that have moved to the U.S. and actually around where we are in Chicago, but because of bad blood, we don't talk to them. And that's definitely stories that we could get into because they're very interesting. Yeah, like I have a relative that actually she lives in the neighborhood across the street, and we didn't see her for 12 years because of bad blood. It gets into my parents' childhoods too, and it took a long time for me to really understand like why. I was someone that just like very much hated my parents and felt jealous of other people, and felt like the world was stacked against me. Like, well, because I had to be walking on eggshells when my mom was home. She was someone, when Tony shares the story about your parents like asking where the salt is in the closet, that is a story that hits home to me very true, because if I couldn't find the salt, I was going to get yelled at. She had a feeling of like, if I was not able to find the salt or not able to do something that she said, then she would feel like I'm doing it on purpose and I'm trying to hurt her. I'm trying to make her angry or whatever it is, because she had the beliefs around her that everybody in the world was against her. So that made it so that I was walking the eggshells all the time. But it gave me the gift of being able to be really empathetic and really understand people and really read people at an instant, because I had to when I was a kid to know if my mom was going to blow up if I said the wrong thing and if I should just shut up. So definitely very different upbringings.
Oh my gosh, totally different. It's like total opposite.
Total opposites.
Right.
Wow,
but what's
incredible.
My parents never fought in front of us that I know of. I mean, I can think of 2 instances my whole life, maybe. And still, I had to develop the ability to really, really read people's emotions and the microfacial expressions and things like this. I wanted friends so bad. I learned this much later in life. I think that there's a bit of fear, like fear of emotional intimacy in at least one side of my parents' family. And I see that manifesting a bit, not necessarily between my parents, but between my family members in public or around other people. One-on-one, they will connect. But when they're in a group, I see walls go up. So I learned that I had walls, and I'll let people in a little bit, but not all the way. So one-on-one, I would feel like I had these deep connections, but when I was in a group, I felt myself as an outcast. So I tended to lead the group so that I could be part of things, without having that true deep connection. So I was the one hosting or being in charge or guiding or whatever, while everyone was having fun and talking and like interacting with each other. And I think I did that partially because I had lots of experiences growing up. Like some things were emotionally challenging in ways that you would never really expect from having such a good family life and upbringing. Uh, but it let me relate to so many other people at school, but I wouldn't let them in, and I wouldn't tell them. I don't know, but I think there were some hormonal changes going on with my mom
Mm.
during my high school years, and I was the one that it was let out on. So that coupled with lots of positive reinforcement, I think it was when I was growing up, but the positive reinforcement was based on how good I did and judgments. I didn't receive negative, like the punishments were very non-existent because I never did anything bad really. Always had very good, strong morals and ethics, but I connected my worth to things that I did and things that I achieved because of how positive the reinforcement was with certain things. So if I wasn't achieving or if I wasn't doing something incredible, I felt worthless. And so I used that to I used my ability to detect microfacial expressions and detect, feelings and energies from people and my parents very quickly, um, to figure out what was going on. And also, my parents hid things from me when I was little. Uh, Nothing crazy, but just so that I didn't have to bear it. But kids know,
Yeah,
they look up at you and they know. And
they
it's
know.
like whatever they're going to imagine in their head is a lot worse than the reality
Hmm.
usually. So, and that was very, very true with me. So, when I was 8, people thought I was a teenager. Um, I would go
'Cause you're
play
very
with,
tall at
yes,
8.
I'm
I know
yes,
you're
I'm
tall now, but at 8, you were really tall as well.
yeah, I think at 12 I was taller than my mom and as tall as my dad. My dad was like, oh, my dad's 6'2". I must have been close to 6 foot I don't know. I was tall, but um, basically I've been playing around with kids, with neighbor kids, and asked by their parents to stop playing with their kids because they thought I was a teenager,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I was the same age. I was, and they wouldn't do it nicely because they were freaked out. But they just didn't know. Trick or treating every time. Aren't you a little old? And then I would take my mask off, and they'd see my face, and they'd be like, "Oh, no, you're a little kid."
Yeah.
So there was a whole lot of like, "Oh, I'm supposed to be this adult." So when I was 12, the idea of making a mistake or acting like a kid was like, "Oh, I'm too old for that. I'm not a kid anymore." Um, I had to be the adult. Adults would confide in me because I adopted that role. So, like aunts and uncles would confide in me with troubles and issues they were having about my cousins who are way older than me, and I developed the ability to help them with it, that maturity, and also there was a good bit of pressure on me. I was always the one that my parents were like, "Oh, I know. Look at him. Sorry, look how big he is," and things like this. And I would try to hide behind them, but couldn't because I was bigger than them as a little kid. So it was very like I developed a strong aversion to eye contact and being in the spotlight, and felt like I also had to perform and be someone that I'm not, and that there was a lot of pressure that was accidentally placed on me,
Hmm.
um, and I over the years just did not take healthy meanings to it and felt like my worth was attached to it. So yeah.
It sounds like you got your validation from performance and outcome, you know.
Absolutely external
Yeah.
validation.
Yeah.
Mm.
Not your effort or anything like that. It's all based on what did you achieve?
Right.
Yeah.
not progress.
No.
And to make it more difficult is because I didn't let anybody in, nobody really knew what I achieved. So
yeah, that's something that we shared in common is we didn't let people in, and I mean for different reasons, but also I got a lot of my validation from external people because I didn't get it from my parents. And not because they didn't think that I was doing great things, but more so because they just didn't know, they didn't have the time. They're both working full time and fighting when they're at home. So that's where their energy was going. And I became a kid that also was my friends' parents would call me if they were trying to get to my friend because they knew I was the responsible one because I had to be responsible for myself when I was so young. So I matured also much earlier. And that also led to me being told all the time that, oh, you're the responsible one. Oh, you're the smart one. And then my teachers would pick up on that. And while I did do well in school going up until high school, I was always told that I was a smart kid and I was going to be an engineer, going to be a doctor, going to be all these things. And that became my identity. It was other people's beliefs about me became my identity. And then when in high school, I started doing like AP classes and honors classes and couldn't get away with it without studying, but I didn't know how to study. I was like very much just go with the flow and do, and not, I never learned how to prepare for things because I wasn't really challenged when I was younger. And then when I got older and my grades weren't doing well, I would not blame myself. I would blame my teachers because my identity was that I was a smart kid. And because this is now telling me that I'm not a smart kid, well, I know I'm a smart kid. So it can't be me that's the problem. It has to be the teachers, has to be the system, has to be whatever. Even though deep down I knew that like I should be studying, but I felt like I was lazy. And that came from me, and I learned this later, but I had a very strong video game addiction because when I would, my parents would be fighting downstairs, I would just be in my room playing video games and like drowning out the world and like blasting the sound of video games so that I could just escape from those feelings of fear or anxiety or whatever.
Wasn't safe out there.
No, definitely
Outside
wasn't
of your
safe
room.
out there. Absolutely wasn't safe out there. And then in high school, even school, which something that I used to be successful at, felt like a thing that was bringing me more anxiety, bring more unsafetyness. And so I would run to video games and eventually phones and everything else because like it was the only thing I knew how to do. And it took me forever to realize, until going to Tony Robbins events, to realize like what I was actually doing to myself. So we both developed that like identity from external validation. And then I would even, one, I would blame the teachers. And then two, I would boast about other things that I were doing that were very cool and very smart. So I always seemed like the smart kid. Like I vividly remember this in AP chemistry class. I would always answer questions very quickly that I knew the answers to. And then when the teacher was like lecturing about things that I didn't quite understand, I would sit on my phone listening to physics lectures and playing physics lectures because I was like, oh, I'm so smart.
Wow.
Yeah. And so like on my phone, I listened to this and then people would be looking at me and they like my class thought I was one of the smartest kids in the class. And people would come to me for answers for questions. But realistically, like I was getting a C. And it made it so that I became the founder and president of the Science National Honor Society at my school. Again, only out of significance because like it wasn't like really an interest of mine. But I wanted to be the one that was leading these things. I wasn't even meeting the criteria because you had to get a B in your classes to be able to even be in the club. So, like, of course, I again didn't take responsibility for it. I blamed my teachers. I blamed the system for failing me. But in reality, like it wasn't until I started to realize what I was doing to myself and take control of that and like blame effectively and understand that if I continue to blame other people, I have no responsibility. So my ego is safe, but that means I can't actually change anything. I have no power to change anything.
to a flower.
Yeah.
Yeah, entirely relate to a lot of that. Except I didn't run from issues at home towards video games. I ran to dopamine in general, video games, food, anything that I had positive memories of as a kid. I tried to recreate even moments and events with other cousins and family members. Tried to recreate it every moment that I got, which led to lots of control instead of just being in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that to run from very similar fears and anxieties and confusions of not knowing who I was and all of these things.
And it's
Yeah.
interesting too, because we saw that it's one of the other guests we had on. We talked about it at the Global Youth Leadership Summit in the beginning, how we would see the kids when they felt awkward or they because they don't know anybody. They're coming in there, they don't know anybody. So it's really awkward for them sometimes to start. And, especially the shy ones. And oh, look at Rayhan. See, right? They go straight to their phones, just like you would to video games. They didn't have video games there. So let's go to the phones because that's the next best alternative
It's their
to
safe
safety.
space.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to
it's
safety.
their safe space.
So interesting because this, we're talking big, huge difference in age here, but
Yeah.
it's still going on.
I think it's the same pattern. It's just like expressing it in a different way, right? Like Nick, you talked about the dopamine thing. It can manifest itself in food or in other habits. Some people it's even sleep. For
Yeah.
some people it's going to sleep because they're like they just need to shut off. That's their safe
Yep.
space. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think what you both shared right there like fully resonates with so many people, and this is such a good thing for parents to hear. We've talked about this before. Your kid playing video games or having these habits is not necessarily a bad thing. The questions that you should be asking are why? Like, why do they lock themselves in their room? Is it because they don't feel safe outside of their room? Like, there are different questions that we should be asking. And I think that you both sharing your experience has opened that up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing too for a kid to be able to communicate. And I knew that when I was a kid, I did not at all know how to communicate it. And so again, it's like you said, it's super important for parents to be hearing this. When I was actually in college, that's when I started transitioning to sleep as my way of like, I don't want to think about this anymore. So I'm just going to sleep for 12 to 14 hours out of the day. Because like you said, it's your safe space and you can be in my dreams and imagine a life of what I would rather it being. It got chopped up to me having some energy disorder or something. I forget exactly what it was.
Hmm.
And depression. And I
Yeah.
was actually diagnosed with bipolar depression. And once I got that diagnosis, I fell into it way harder because again, like when people are telling you your identity, whether it's parents, teachers, friends, therapists, whoever, if you fully take that in, like you can fully take that in, and then it becomes your reality, even though it might not be. And again, it wasn't until I went to Tony Robbins events that and really understood myself that I was able to bring myself out of those old patterns because they're serving you.
Oh
Right, the
yeah.
video game
Yeah.
thing is serving you. The sleep is serving you in certain ways, and if you're not able to get those needs met in a different way that's more healthy, then you're going to continue. And I would always continue to go down the wrong path.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack here from what you both have just shared. We recently had a guest on, again, from GYLS. His name is Christian Lawleys, and he talked about family constellations and how there are imbalances that are passed on over generations, right? From what we're hearing, at least from both of your experiences, there's a lot of stuff that were passed down and that have been passed down over generations. However, from what I'm hearing now is that you are both very aware of what those imbalances were. And it seems like you've done quite a bit of the work and everything, and you've been able to almost break that pattern or start breaking it at least and working on it. And that is something that obviously is incredible. Like it's an incredible thing to do because most of the time it just gets passed on and no one really thinks about it, no one really does anything about it. And you have two very different stories, but have somehow been able to come together and have similar experiences and both work on it together. And I want to start talking about that now. How were you able to break those patterns? Like, where did it all start How were you able to go from people telling you and being surrounded by, let's say, oh, you're going to be this, you're going to do this in life, and this is who you're going to be, to then saying, you know what? No, I want to pave my own path. I want to do my own thing. Where did that come from?
That's a big question.